Thank you, everybody, for being here. I appreciate it. Today, we're going to talk through teams in the architecture and just kind of explore how, when we're looking at our logical architecture, planning for the rollout of teams, if that's not something we've done yet, or just trying to get our arms around what we've got already. I think this will be a useful conversation for us to have. Speaking of us, by the way, my name is Joy Apple. I'm a Microsoft MVP and a modern workplace strategist with PAIT Group. Basically, I get to help people figure out how to roll out all of the awesome tools that are available for us inside of Microsoft 365. I spend a lot of time talking with clients about how to get from where they are today, maybe an on-prem SharePoint, Google Drive, file shares, and into a modern intranet. I've been working with SharePoint and Microsoft products and technologies for over 20 years. Used to, we would talk about just moving into SharePoint. But now it's a little more complicated, but it's also a lot more useful in terms of the features we get when we move into a modern intranet. So please don't feel that you need to hold questions to the end or anything like that. I'm a very informal person. So as we go, if you have a question, please feel free, unmute, ask the question, or if you want to put it in chat, and I'm going to trust that these fine gentlemen that we've been talking with earlier will shout out at me and let me know if we've got any questions that come in chat. So congratulations.
Not only do we have fine gentlemen in the chat, but we have Dan Usher finally join us as well.
Dan,
Isaac,
Fred.
You've been referred to as a gentleman.
No, I wasn't making so much no.
I try. I'm a Southern girl, right? We ever have manners? Okay, awesome. Well, I appreciate your help with chat. And so let's get started. So what the heck is Teams and why do I care, right? That's the intro slide. If you're new to Teams, if you're not new to Teams, this will be a recap. But Teams is a chat-based communication platform. I will confess, when Microsoft first announced that Teams was coming, I made a very audible eye roll, because why on earth did the world need one more chat platform? That's kind of where I was. We had Skype. I was fine. I was still using Slack for non-inside of PAIT things. All these chat tools were already there. Do we really need to muddy the waters with one more? But then they rolled it out, and my company, we dove into it immediately and started creating teams for our projects. So every customer got a team, and we started working in it that way. The first time I saw the files tabs, I did have a little bit of a come apart until I started digging to see how that files tab really integrates with what we already have. Those are some of the things we're going to look at as we go through the conversation today. Teams gives us this great meeting hub with really good meeting and live event capabilities and a whole lot more. One thing I like to call out as we start exploring Teams is Teams really only does about, in my mind, 3 things natively. It does chat, which it does very well. Meetings and calling, you can kind of squint your eyes and say those 2 things are the same. But what it also does is provide for us a service application platform to make it really easy, which is important for our very busy business users. It's easy to incorporate all of the other things we do in a day into one place. So I do think it's fair to say it is a hub for teamwork. There are 2 basic types of teams inside of Teams. We have our public teams. So when this team is created, anyone in the organization could search for this team and join. You can also generate join codes, send it out, and let people use that code to get into the team. So there's security there in the terms of, by default, it's locked down to the organization, but anyone in the organization can come join. Another type of team that we have is the private teams. They are restricted. The team is a security boundary, and only the people that we explicitly invite into that team can join. That said, there are org-wide teams. I believe last time I looked, you could have up to 5 org-wide teams. When one of those is created, everybody in the organization is automatically a member. I would say use those sparingly. But if your organization, for one reason or another, is not utilizing Yammer, that might be a good place to have communities. But I would definitely explore that. There's other implications, and that could be a whole other session. All right, components of a team. What we see is just that initial glimpse of what Teams offers for us. We see the tab for posts, which in a team is chat. We see that files tab, which is what initially almost made me have my come apart. If that's Southern lingo that you're not used to, I got really mad when I thought at first we were now telling people to put stuff in Teams and SharePoint. But after a little clicking around, that anxiety eased, and I'm good with it now. We also see inside of Teams, we have the ability to add additional tabs, and we have channels at first glance. But what we don't see are some of those underlying features and capabilities that come bundled into the team. My favorite being that Microsoft 365 group. That is important because when I create my team and I start adding other owners and members, what I'm doing is I'm putting those people in a Microsoft 365 group. It's the modern version of an Azure Active Directory group or an AD group, depending on what world you're living and working in now. It's a security service. So when I add someone into my team, I'm giving them access, permissions to all the other components that come with that team, such as the connected SharePoint site, the Outlook inbox, the planner plan, the group calendar, the OneNote notebook. There's all kinds of things that come with a team. And that Microsoft 365 group gives everybody access to it. So I'm not having to run around and add everybody after the fact. I love that. Thank you, Microsoft. It makes my job a lot easier. SharePoint does the file management for Teams. And this is a really important thing to talk about. Did I hear someone unmute? Have a question? Nope, and we muted again. Okay, no problem. The first time, I think I said this already, I jumped into a team. I'm going to bring that team over to where I'm sharing. Is this the right one? Project Excelsior, sure, that'll work. I saw this files tab, and this caused a lot of anxiety for me. But what we see when we get in here and start working is that I can open this in SharePoint. SharePoint is the big blade in the Swiss Army knife that is Microsoft 365. This does our document management for us. I kind of twitch a little sometimes, and it's just because I'm a little uptight about things when I hear someone talk about migrating into Teams. Because factually, when you migrate and you're putting things so you can get to it inside of Teams, you're really migrating to SharePoint, but you're making it accessible to Teams. All right, let's minimize that for a minute. So SharePoint still does all of our file management for us. It's not some other thing. If I share a file inside of my team, SharePoint. If I'm using one-on-one chat, that's going to be OneDrive. So OneDrive for one-on-one chat file sharing. If I share it in chat, I'm giving you a link to access my file that I shared that's stored in my OneDrive. If you share a file in chat, you're giving the person you're chatting with, a shared link to come into your OneDrive, just that item, whatever that may be. OneDrive basically is baby SharePoint. So it's still a true statement to say that SharePoint is doing the file management for us inside of Teams.
Hey, Joy, what happens when someone decides to break inheritance of permissions, though? Does Teams just figure it out for me?
It does not. So I have not tested breaking permissions on a folder that's tied to that channel. I may go do that and tweet the results later. Stay tuned.
Basically, it inspires a mess. That's all I can say.
It's going to break things. It's
Yep.
going to really break things. Oh, I'm having to resist the urge to launch into a permissions sermon, but granular permissions are basically breaking up our teamwork. So when we're talking about teams, teamwork, teamifying, and all that jazz, let me find, where did my team go? That's not it. But basically what I'm doing is I'm creating a team and I'm saying, hey, team, come work. Oh, but not you on this. So is that person part of the team or not? Or should we say, does this content belong to the team or does it not? If you're starting to put stuff in teams and then you're feeling the need to restrict access to stuff, move the stuff, or you need to redefine your team and who makes up that team. The more we break permissions, the more we're siloing content and the more management we're making for ourselves down the road. Okay, so there's the mini sermon. That'll be like the free version of today's session. So let's step back and look at architecture at a high level. And we're going to talk a little bit about permissions again in just a few minutes. So modern architecture, SharePoint Online, communication sites, teams. Modern architecture is flat architecture. The Microsoft world is flat. I'm thinking about doing like a little series of videos that kind of does a spoof on the flat earthers, conspiracy theories, or maybe just theories, depending on your point of view, and adapting that from modern architecture. Microsoft now recommends we avoid creating subsites within our site collections, which means now we can just call them sites, not collections. Every site is a top-level site inside the architecture. We don't nest. We have hub sites that we can use to relate sites that are related in scope and topic, but we have different audiences, different security needs, or just need the room for organization. So what that means is if we're coming into modern SharePoint and we're looking at modern architecture, we really need to go take a look at our nested structures that we have elsewhere. If it's SharePoint, we need to break open those site collections, elevate those subsites, those sub-subsites, those sub-sub-sub-sites. Those get to be their own standalone sites. If you are perhaps still working out of a folder structure on a file share or a Google Drive, that means your folders are currently your permission containers and your organization. Odds are those larger folders that you have are going to identify your primary sites for your architecture. Where folders have different permissions, that's probably going to be identifying team sites or areas where there needs to be a level of security, which means a separate site. And a lot of times when we start going down this path, or I start having a conversation with a client, then they kind of have this thought in some way or another that that's a lot of sites. I'm seeing team sites and seeing team sites everywhere. And it can definitely feel like that. But what's the difference between having a lot of sites and a lot of folders? They're serving the same purpose. And if you were one of the early joiners, we were talking about SharePoint Online. What were we talking about? Limits, right? How much can I have in here? What's my storage limit? What's your credit card limit, right? Because you can keep buying storage. So that storage is going to get eaten up, whether we're talking about creating sites or creating a whole lot of folders, because it's the content inside of them that matters, right? So we look at those nested and those child sites. We're coming from classic SharePoint structures, classic architecture, and we want to break those out to being standalone top-level sites. How many times in these old architecture structures did we have a site with a subsite, with a subsite, with a subsite, and somewhere in there, there's a site that's really not doing anything, but just allowing those lower level sites to exist because we couldn't delete it because there were children involved down below? Now's a great time to go identify those sites, clean them up. Do we have a lot of subsites where the permission's pretty much the same? Just Joy created a subsite and Dan created a subsite, and then Joe created one, and they're all kind of doing the same thing. Consolidate, bring it together, organize our content. This is the best time to do it. Those subsites that are going to get migrated and pushed up, probably going to need to look at those permissions. If that subsite inherited permissions and we still feel the need, we need a separate site so they can have their own team and their own private conversations, then now is the time to evaluate those permissions, create them as needed. It's never a bad time, honestly, to go evaluate your permissions and make sure things are set up the way that is appropriate. Be honest, when we do file share migrations, when the business units get in there and departments are looking at their folders and they're like, oh my gosh, everyone had access to this folder that never should have been. Oops, right? Most people probably didn't get into it because it was just so hard to dig through the folder structure. It was probably safe because it was so far buried and hidden, but gives us the time to address those security issues. If you're thinking, oh my gosh, team sites everywhere, I don't want you to panic. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed about it. And it's tempting to, because, oh my gosh, that sounds like a lot of sites. I'm going to have to manage all that stuff. How am I going to get to things? What are we going to do? We're going to take a deep breath. We're not going to panic, because this is actually fantastic from an administrative point of view. If I create everything as a top level site, team site, communication site, doesn't matter. When I go to my admin center, I can see all of those sites. I don't have to worry about subsites, right? Before, when we had subsites, we went into central administration, we were only seeing the tip of the iceberg. Couldn't really see a true representation of what was going on inside those site collections. But now we can. There's nothing hidden. And when we're not nesting those deep, deep, deep structures, we're not having to deal with those tangled up, nasty knots of broken permissions, right? We need a different set of security boundaries. We need another site. Keeps permissions clean, and it makes our job a whole lot easier. Anybody ever run into the situation where they were trying to help figure out broken permissions or nested folders, and they saw that URLs were breaking because they had gone too long and SharePoint just couldn't figure it out? I once spent 6 weeks helping a subcontractor for a government agency figure out how to elevate deep, deep, deep subsites and nested folder structures, because search couldn't find stuff anymore. Backup, recovery didn't know where stuff was. Links didn't work. Unless you're going crazy with nested folders in this flat architecture, you don't ever have to worry about that again. It's very free. And if you're still thinking, that's a lot of stuff, the last time I heard, feel free if anyone has newer information or if I got this wrong, Microsoft has raised that limit of site collections in our tenant to about 2 million. So you're probably going to be fine. Probably going to be fine. Let me bring over an admin center for us real quick. Okay, for real. This is why live demos are awesome. Here it comes. So Modern Admin Center, if this is something you hadn't seen before, it's lovely. I like it quite a lot. If I come right here to sites, active sites, I'm going to get a true representation of every site that I've got out there in my architecture. Nothing is hidden from me. I don't have to hunt around, and I really have a great tool in the Admin Center now to go find all of my team sites. Notice I can also break that down into just my classic team sites or my modern team sites that don't have an Office 365 group. That tells me there's no team associated with that group. So that's good information. You see, I've been doing some testing here, right? Boring test names. It's a lot. It sure is. But I have search. Search works beautifully inside of the Admin Center, finding your sites. and you've got, I'll pick on this Arkansas team here, you've got a great set of tools to help you manage those sites. Even just a smidge of analytics, just a smidge. Don't get too excited. I'm not going to see any policies that have been applied. It's really fantastic. So let's dive into the reason we're all here. Let's talk about how Teams impacts this architecture, because it surely and absolutely does. Let me get my presenter view back. All right, Teams is for teamwork. It can be for whole departments, though we know typically our departments are going to break out into smaller groups. You have options on how that might work best for you. You may choose to create an HR team with channels. We'll talk about that more in just a minute, for the different things that everybody in HR needs to talk about. And then you may go create separate HR teams for each division of HR. Or if you have HR in multiple states, maybe each state needs a team where they can talk about state level compliance, policies, laws, employee guidelines. There are a lot of options. It's very flexible. But if you need a new set of security around a team where a group of people can have their private conversations and share documentation that no one outside of that group should see, you need a separate team. It's not wrong to have a lot of teams for one department for cross-functional project purposes. That's not wrong. That's actually very right. So traditional team site usage, we would have a department, a group, a project, HR, wellness, benefits, IT, right? Each one of these areas probably is going to justify having their own team for security, for organization. And it gives us that more secure team site on the SharePoint side of the world. You know, it always panics people when they talk about SharePoint and it's a site and can anyone find my site? What is this search? What it's going to do? I don't know. Security is built right in from the beginning. As long as you don't want someone in that team site that you've created as private, they're not going to be able to search and find its conversations or its content. So when we talk about this traditional team site usage in the organization, well, it absolutely makes sense then that Microsoft built this for SharePoint and Teams to work hand in hand, because we're used to using SharePoint document libraries for our document management, getting alerts if someone uploads something to a library. My favorite one is getting an alert when someone deletes something in a library, automatic routing of documents, having our versioning, all that good stuff, team meetings on the SharePoint team calendar. Awesome. So we come in, we take that stuff in SharePoint and marry it together, which they actually did last year in Orlando right before Ignite, with the team. Now you work on your stuff. You have your alerts, your versioning, your document management tools, your automation, and you can bring that all into Teams where you can actually talk about it and work on it together with people real time. You can work on that content in such a way that we don't have to go to email anymore to have conversations about what we're doing. And if we follow that line of thinking, now we're bringing our internal conversations into Teams, and Outlook is going to be reserved for almost I don't want to say a higher priority, but we know there's a different priority on what's coming into our inbox in Outlook because our internal conversations are happening inside of Teams. Pretty exciting space to be in. Teams is going to start promoting teamwork because the messages in our channels are going to involve the whole team rather than specific folks, which means we can start to get rid of those forked email threads. I am the queen of sending an email to the 3 people that I think should get it. And then as soon as I hit send, I go, oh crap, I left off 2 other people. So I go to my sent items and I forward it to those other people. They respond over here and everybody else is responding to that original email. And nobody has a clear picture except me. I'm monkey in the middle, translating it for everybody. If I just go to the channel in my team, Everybody's already there. If they want to respond, they can, but they don't have to. Either way, we're all consuming the same information. We're all on the same page. Fantastic. Channels are going to be more conducive for chat as a team. I know I personally do not want to be the person that adds one more thread to an already pretty long email thread. So I may not be as likely to hop in and offer an opinion or an observation. Inside of Teams, it's just begging us to. It's very inviting to come join in on that conversation, especially if we can have our GIFs and our emoji and all that stuff that sometimes our companies like, sometimes they don't, but it enhances that involvement of the team. It's searchable. Control F now works inside of Teams. Sweet. If it's searchable, it's findable. So I can search inside of team conversations. I can search for files. I can search for messages. Makes it a lot easier to find my stuff. Coming soon, we're going to have the same Microsoft search experience inside of Teams. So now I'll be searching my tenant, not just the confines of Teams. That'll be a game changer. And my files are going to be organized inside of channels rather than hiding behind that little bitty paper clip somewhere in that email thread in Outlook, which is one of my personal pet peeves. So let's talk about channels and how they impact our architecture. So when I'm in a team, I'm going to use a channel to organize both my content and my conversation. And that's very important. I've got a lot of clients that maybe they're not sure how to create a channel or what those channels would be. So they're like, well, we'll just start with general. That's where we'll live and it'll be fine. Maybe try it for a week. But if you spend very long inside a general, it's going to start to act kind of like that group text you've got going with your family, where it's very random. You're really not sure what's going on. You know, that one weird uncle responds to something from a year ago today. What is this even about? That's what your general channel will become if we don't ever branch out. And it's kind of cheating if you work on projects, because what we do at PAIT Group is we have our team for our customer. General is where just the general information about the customer or for the project goes. It's not work specific. But then we create a channel for every scope of work we're doing for the client. It's a little too easy in a project environment. But if this is HR, perhaps I'm going to have a team for all of HR and then break it out into separate teams according to what those teams do. Teams, if you work on policies, you might have a channel for employee policies. You might have a channel for department policies. You might have a channel for SOPs. And you do your reviews of those policies in your channel. This is where we work. We get stuff done. For me, if I'm working on deployment planning for my Excelsior client, I'm going to talk about it in the deployment planning channel, and I'm going to upload my content for deployment planning in that channel. I would never go to the Power App build to do that because this is my organization. Every time we create a channel inside of Teams, we're getting a folder inside of the Documents library, or also known as the Shared Documents library inside of SharePoint. It's a one-to-one relationship there for standard channels. That means I am a member of this team. That means I have access to the general channel, the deployment planning channel, every standard channel in the team, because we're all part of the same team. Well, what about private channels, you may be asking? Let's talk about private channels. I have mixed feeling about private channels because basically what we're doing is anytime you see this padlock and a private channel is created, you're introducing granular permissions to your team, but you're also impacting your logical architecture and your information architecture. Because when I create a private channel inside of my team, I'm actually creating a whole other SharePoint site collection. What that means, in the real world, As I have said, not everyone on the team gets to know that Excelsior PM exists. This is the project management channel. This is where the company president and the project manager talk about the dollars and the cents and the contract for the team. Maybe, I don't know, it's my example. But what I'm saying is everyone on Project Excelsior can come to deployment planning, migration, and the flow, but they cannot come into Project or Excelsior PM. That is secured, it's locked down. Only the people I add can come into that channel. From an architecture and a functional perspective, let's hit the right button. Where is? Okay, I'll play your little game. Here it is. When I click on this documents breadcrumb, something goes wrong. All right. I love live demos. I would love to sign in again. Yay, it worked. So when I do that, I see a folder for every channel I created, so SharePoint can do its document management awesomeness. What I don't see is a folder for that private channel. There is no Excelsior PM here. I have a whole other SharePoint site for that. So if I go to Excelsior PM, I can go to Files, or I could use the ellipsis over on the side, and I open in SharePoint. Here's Excelsior PM. It's in a site that's named after the team and the channel. And here's the folder that holds any content that's put into Teams in this private channel. So I'm going to have to go multiple places if I am a member of that private channel and the team, because it's actually following security best practices. If you have content and it's special, it's sensitive, it needs to be secured, the best practice is to secure the largest object possible. That would be a SharePoint site. So what Teams is doing is saying, okay, you have content that needs to be protected, and it's sensitive and it's secured and it's special. So I'm going to go create you a site with a hard and fast security boundary around it and put your stuff there so the prying eyes of the rest of the team cannot get to it. We can't accidentally inherit permissions in one of those other folders or in this folder in that other library. It's safe, it's secure, it's locked away. Well, what if I want a private channel? Or what if I think I want a private channel and I'm just not sure? Let's talk about it. I have this conversation a lot. I developed this slide out of it. It's evolved a bit since the first time I created it, but it's been this way for about 2 months now. We'll see when I change it next. Are we considering a private channel, which means another SharePoint site for some stuff in our team? If you ask yourself these 2 questions, it will truly help you decide if you need that private channel and that extra site. We've got our stuff. Let's pretend we're holding our stuff in our hand. We've got our stuff. Are all the people in the team I've already got? All right, and I've got this stuff. So all the people that need to see this stuff part of this same team? That's question 1. We've already got our team. I've got this stuff. Should everyone in the team see it? Are we all part of the same team? Is it a breach of security if everyone in the current existing team sees it? Okay, let's slice and dice that question. Okay, yes, we're all part of this team. The security isn't a big deal. It doesn't matter if everybody in Project Excelsior sees the content. Typically, when we're thinking about a private channel for this, we're just trying to organize things in such a way that all of the members of the team don't have a ton of channels to deal with, and they're not having to get a lot of notifications on something that they may not care about. If that's the case, just go right ahead, create a standard channel, and we teach people how to manage their channels effectively. That means we teach people how to, if they don't care about deployment planning, we show them how to hide this channel, or we show them how to mute their notifications. So you notice I've got 8 hidden channels here. These are the channels that for this project, I'm not involved in. I don't really care. So I hide them. When I hide them, it automatically mutes them. So I'm not getting notifications that I just don't care about. Don't need to do a private channel for that. Cool. Okay. Are all of the people part of the same team? They're already in the team. If your answer to that is no, I want to create a private channel and bring a couple of extra people in to just see that private channel, go no further. Can't do that. What you can do with a private channel is pick the people from that existing 365 group and have them in it. You can't bring somebody else in. To do that, you would have to add them to that Microsoft 365 group, which means you're adding them to the whole team. Probably not appropriate. So what you need in that situation is a whole other team, because you're bringing in a different audience, a subset of your existing plus some new people. That's another team. Are all of the people part of the same team? Yes. Is it a breach of security if everyone on the team sees it? Yes. You, my friend, have just hit the private channel lottery. That is the perfect time, because we're in that sort of muddy, not totally clear situation. Well, yeah, it's for the team, but not everyone on the team should see it. That's a cubby hole. And that is a cubby hole that we mark as a private, as a private channel, and it gets its own secure site to hold the content. That's perfect. That is because we have an exception to the content and the people that should see it. It's still about the team, but it's not for everyone on the team. Rock and roll. Rock and roll. That is perfectly justifiable. How we doing? Any questions on private channels?
No, we were just discussing maybe some use cases. Why private channels and why not? This is a great slot, right? It lays it out. If you've got a cubby hole, sure.
Yep.
If you've got the situation I once saw, which is 10 people in the team and 9 private channels, so the boss can talk to each one of them personally, no.
That's what chat is for.
Yeah, and it was, and it
But
was.
Joe, that's 9 cubby holes.
Yeah, 9. Yeah, and it was so that they could work. Submit your draft for the team document to me here. Once I approve it in the private channel, then you can post it to the general so everybody can see it. I was like, no, none of this is real. No, none of this is real. They were hiding their own drafts from each other.
Yeah.
I was like, how do you collaborate? How do you work? Yeah.
Yep, that's anti-team right there. And we don't want to be anti-team. We are pro-team. So, fun facts, you can, please don't. You can have up to 30 private channels per team. Keep in mind, if you do that for that team and all those private channels, you now have 31 SharePoint sites. 31. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. If you do go the route of the private channel, or route, depending on where you may be, I'm kind of cutting these folks off from having all the goodness that's associated with the larger team. And this is when I really started putting a lot of thought behind when should you not? Because I had a client, they created a department team and then a private channel per area in the department. I mean, you could call that a business unit or a functional area, whatever you call that. And then they're like, well, why can't we have a planner plan per private channel? Because you get a planner plan for your team, not your channel. So you're kind of cutting your people off at the knees for the benefits of all the goodies you get when you have your team. There are other options where you could slice and dice this as well that doesn't involve private channels. But again, your granular permissions truly should be exceptions, not rules. You could utilize tabs for some of this. It could be that you're in your Virginia HR team. There's shared resources on the corporate HR team site. And it would sure be nice just to get to those in your channel instead of having to go to a different team. Tab to it, right? If you have access to a SharePoint library in another site, and let me go back and say, if you and your team have access to content in another SharePoint site, tab it, my friends. Make yourself an easy button in whatever channel it makes sense, or maybe two, right? A tab is just a link, basically, that opens in a window for you. So bring those shared resources in via a tab. If you've got content in your SharePoint site, because don't forget, here we go, it's SharePoint time. Bum, bum, bum. If you've got more than just these channels and these channel folders, like invoices, probably don't edit invoices a whole lot, but if a subset of the team works on invoices a lot, and it'd sure be handy to just stay in Teams, but be able to reference those invoices, put a tab to it, right? Maybe there's old planning reference content. We're not working on it. It's not going through revisions. It's not going through drafts and all this jazz. But I just want to look at it. I need to reference it. Tab to it. The channels and the folders are really meant to be that hot and heavy team collaboration. We are getting stuff done. We're working on things. It's awesome. And we're talking about it while we do it. But you still have an entire SharePoint site just ready to be used. Use it. You can go to site contents. You can have Microsoft lists. You can have libraries, whatever you need. And just tab to it. And what's even more better, if you have particular documents, well, I should get out of the private channel for that. If you have particular documents that you and your team use day in and day out, and you don't want to have to go to files, you don't want to have to dig through, you just want to be able to find it really easy, okay, make it a tab. Just put it at your fingertips. You can tell I demo this a lot. I got a lot of tabs going on. I'm on a big screen. If you're on a smaller screen, it will start to truncate those and give you a drop down. So you might want to put some logic behind how many tabs sprawl out. But if that doesn't bug people, go for it. I click the Add a Tab button. Now, your Add a Tab experience may be drastically different than mine because I'm a consulting company and we don't have anything locked down because we want to demo. But the stuff up top is going to be reserved to primarily Microsoft products and tools. And then there's the ability to tab to third-party tools. Make sure they are approved by your IT team, please, if you see the tab. And you can incorporate that stuff right in. You can even go to other websites. It's fantastic. If you're used to working in a traditional SharePoint site and you loved your quick links or your links to other stuff in your global or your left navigation, use a tab. Tab to it inside of Teams, link to it inside of SharePoint. This doesn't expand your architecture. It actually brings your architecture back to you.
Have you ever recommended somebody use the Add Cloud Storage in the Files tab to link to another library or a library in the same site?
No, I typically will just come back and point them. If it's in the same site or even if it's not, you could just use the Document Library tab and pull it right in this way. And
I mean, I like the tabs, but there's only so much real estate for tabs, and then you get that drop down, and you got to see, 5 tabs hidden, which is kind of complicated. So I've had a few instances where I've recommended, add cloud storage, and it shows up right in the Files tab as a hot link to the document library.
Go to pivot to a different. Let me bring this over here. Get back in my demo tenant for that. So I'll show the Files tab. that's fun. I love that. That's fantastic. Well, I'll let that think about its place in the universe. But yes, the Files tab is super handy. It can show you not just what you're working on in Teams, but the things that you've been working on throughout the Microsoft 365 environment, your Outlook, your SharePoint, your OneDrive. It's pretty fantastic. I just don't want to show my work one for confidentiality reasons. All right, well, okay, we'll just let that think about itself. But yes, I do like that suggestion because it can get cumbersome, as you can see here. The alternative to that, if it's feasible, if it makes sense, is to go, okay, contracts. Should the tab to contracts be in deployment planning, or does that make sense to be in general or another channel? You might break them out that way. But now I do like the idea of utilizing the Files tab. All right, I'm going to step us out to breaking down the architecture in general. SharePoint, again, the big blade in the Swiss Army knife. Those communication sites that we have inside of SharePoint Online, we recommend utilizing those for content that is shared throughout the organization. So if a small group of people broadcasts information out to the organization as a whole or a large subset of the organization, your communication site is perfect for that. It's going to be what I call your cleanest experience as far as security and permissions go, because communication sites cannot be connected to an M365 group. You do still have your traditional site owners, members, and visitors. If you have communities that have been built up inside of Yammer, throw that web part on the page. The Yammer web part has been improved. It's really great. If you're currently rolling your eyes at Yammer, I did too up until about a couple weeks ago. Yammer in Teams, I am learning because it has been a growth process for me. I've been hurt by Yammer in the past, but they really do provide two very different things. And I find I'm becoming Pavlov's dog when it comes to my Teams notifications. I have to respond. I have to look. I have to see. So if we pull out our community stuff, our learning areas of the environment of the organization, we put those in Yammer, then I'm not hopping at those notifications that I may not really need to look at right now while I'm busy. I can go to my Yammer community, consume that information at the right time. So I would encourage thinking about that if you haven't already. Team sites are going to be those traditional SharePoint workspaces for our department, our team, our collaborative efforts, our projects. Document management, approvals, versioning, all that good stuff happens there. And when we layer in Teams to that, where we can access all those team-centric files real time, have discussions and conversations, I tell you, it's magic, friends. If you've ever been working inside something, if you come open up that document, please don't ask me that again. Let this think about itself. Opening up this conversation tab and having a real-time conversation while we're working on it without having to have a meeting, it's fantastic. It is fantastic. And then it will keep my conversation around the document threaded. So if I ever need to go back and find out what Allison said about this document on the 5th, got it right here. I don't have to go search for that conversation. It's tied to the document. And there she is again. All right, back to the slides. So Teams for teamwork, SharePoint for organizational wide on the communication sites. Just don't forget, you do have this awesome SharePoint team site that can just do a lot for you. And it keeps everything from getting cluttered inside of your channels if you use that team site to break out more of your reference content. If you already have some SharePoint team sites out there and they're not tied for Teams, you don't have to start from scratch. If you or your responsible IT partner goes into Teams, they can go pick that existing team, tie a team to it. So you're not having a duplicate or dueling team sites. If that site is more of a classic style and there's no Microsoft 365 group, it can be groupified and then it can be teamified. Life doesn't get much better than that. So this is how we tend to break out architecture when we're presenting to clients. Xmind is what I use for this. It's got a lot of cool maps and capabilities inside of it. I probably only use the bare minimum. But if I come into my operations, for my architecture, they could have an information page or a communication site where users can go browse to consume information that they share with everyone. But then they have a SharePoint team site. And they might have news and announcements. Some of these news and announcements may roll up somewhere else. It may just stay right here. And then tied to this team site is Teams, where they have their real-time chat, conduct their meetings, utilize it almost as a file sharing experience, because those folders kind of feel familiar if you're fresh off of a file share. And we tab to the content as needed. Now, this particular example, they have some retail stores. So we're going to be working to create for them a retail hub and then a store per, or a site per store. And they're even thinking about rolling out teams, not just team sites. So the store employees that have access to it can have those conversations. They're really seeing the benefit of collaboration in Teams for retail operations, which is pretty exciting. You start to scratch the surface of shifts. It's going to be great. All right, that brings us to the closing slide. Thank you so much for being here and being part of the conversation. We do have a little bit of time for questions, conversations, fun stories about Teams and the architecture. And if you're not following me on Twitter, please do. If you're not on Twitter, that's where the latest and greatest, best information is for Microsoft 365. I encourage you to go find friends on Twitter and get them to the Microsoft accounts. All right.
Yes, I second that. Twitter is, you can find a lot of good stuff.
So much good stuff. I mean, there's a lot of noise on social media these days, but the good thing is it's your choice whether you follow it or not. So,
yeah, the only thing I use Twitter for is Microsoft 365 and SharePoint, which cuts down on the noise.
Yes,
that's true.
That is a true story.
It's worth, if you've got a Twitter handle already for everything, it's worth weaponizing a new handle just for SharePoint Microsoft 365 because you'll.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
So I had a couple questions.
Sure.
So I've been having, we rolled out Teams actually very recently. I'm in the federal government space, and we rolled it out maybe a month, or I guess it's November already, 2 months ago.
Okay.
And as I begun to engage in conversations with various offices, they invite me to their staff meetings, and we talk about, what does it mean from a migration from Skype perspective, but also from the collaboration perspective. There is a lot of confusion around channels because they don't store their files today along the same topics they have conversations around.
Okay.
And so just generally curious in your experience, I have not found the files tab to be very useful to them. They're looking at Teams as a conversational tool. Certainly they will be collaborating on files, but they already had well-defined, we're federal government. So we have well-defined file structures based on, records management that they have within SharePoint already, and the team structure, they start to have conversations. Do we need to migrate our files into those folders? And then of course we have very complicated document types for metadata within SharePoint, and that doesn't necessarily work if they're all in the same document library. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
If it's not going to work being in the same document library, especially from that metadata perspective, because I get it. It still bugs me that channels equal folders, right? Because if I'm going to have a document, I want my specific metadata for all that. Okay. So it might be that for them, a tab is going to be better.
Mm-hmm.
So they can at least get to it, work on it, and have the metadata that they need. The good thing is it's flexible enough that it's not really, I would never say, well, it's wrong not to use your Files tab. Because for them, it sounds like it would be wrong to use the Files tab. They'd be reinventing that wheel. If I would recommend, if they have areas where, well, we're going to work on the drafts for these things before it goes to those specific document libraries, maybe Files would be the place they could start that, unless it's just going to create more work for them.
Sure.
You know,
yeah.
Might be a good place for drafts and then publish it out.
No, that's not a bad idea. Yeah, I'm just curious. I mean, I thank you for, I think you confirmed somewhat what our challenge is, and we're still trying to experiment, and each team is going to have its own unique take on that, right? If they already didn't have a great file structure, then why not? If they can come up with channels that make sense, then certainly. But you know, a lot of times we're trying to drive Teams channels as a way to stop emailing each other, and then that's different than file storage.
Very.
The other question, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you show them too that every channel gets its own email address.
We don't have that in the government.
Oh, that's right, government cloud.
Yeah, it's real sucky there. I will continue to bother the team.
Yes.
But you're right. That's something we're looking forward to. Although I think there's some updated feature coming where we can like convert an email to a channel chat, but not yet still have an email address for a channel.
Yeah.
The other thing that I found that's very interesting, and maybe it's just because we're in the government version, is when you create a team first, if you create the team through Teams, it's automatically hidden from Exchange. So you don't actually get the great group features of the email address distribution, the calendar. It's all hidden from the Exchange client unless you run a PowerShell script to unhide it. And then they're not automatically subscribed to it. You got to go one more step further once it is exposed in Outlook to go check a box to say, yes, please send an email to everybody. So I've been kind of telling people, if you're going to need it to have that email distribution list feature and you want to use the group calendar, create it as a group first and then teamify it. It's such a pain in the backside, but
it's this is one thing that I still wrong tab. I still scratch my head over. Is this guy conversations will go to that M365 inbox.
They will. You're right. Even if even if they're not getting the distribution, right? But nobody's using that because people are trying to drive to the client. We're using the Teams client, and at less often than we are using the web browser. People have moved away from the web browser because we're heavy Outlook desktop clients, so they're thinking heavy Outlook Teams client, right? It's the new thing. We just installed it.
Oh, I would tell it.
I know it's a different experience on the web. I get that.
Yeah.
The other pain point you're going to run into is when like site mailboxes start to be deprecated and the forcing function over to making use of the capabilities that go with Office 365 groups. And I think Joy, what you were just showing with conversations, how that's not always like, it's confusing to an end user when they see conversations and they go, wait, is that my Teams conversation or is that my IM conversation, or which conversation is that?
Yeah, I wish it was the Teams. I'm hoping for a
Yammer conversation.
I mean, I would love to see a Teams web part, but we'll see. I will say this: back in, we'll say April. Time has no meaning this year, right? But back in April, coworker and I did a webinar on Outlook on the web. And I decided I needed to practice what I preach. So I shut down my Outlook desktop client and I used nothing but the web app for a week. And I have not gone back to the desktop client. It has way more features now than the desktop client. And it's so lightweight compared to it. It's not going to bog down processing like the desktop client can. A year ago, I never would have thought I would be saying this. But the Outlook web app is phenomenal. There's a couple of little things that I haven't figured, like how to set up a different signature for reply than a new email address. But other than that, it's amazing. So just food for thought there. A little off topic.
Best feature ever, send later.
No, I could counter that with when I'm creating a meeting in Outlook, it gives me the little preview of the day I'm scheduling on to see if I'm actually free. When before I would like be toggling back and forth to see.
Yeah.
Just right there. I love that.
Second best feature, dragging and dropping from to do into your calendar.
Yes.
Well, you gotta have to do. Government's still waiting for to do this month, hopefully.
Well, true. There is that minor requirement, but in the web,
I'm going to rain on all the parades because of the government
sidebar.
Government.
So
it was actually working for a short while, and then I think because they finally decided to deploy it, they turned it off right before deployment.
Oh, that's lovely. Also, if you're using Outlook on the web, and it keeps logging me into my work, I don't want it to do that. But down at the bottom where you see all the little things, you can go to your calendar and groups and all that jazz. There's a paper clip now. And if you click that, it will take you to a display of all of your attachments in Outlook. Just the attachments. You can work and get that on your desktop, but it's not quite as fast to get to it. It's fantastic.
So what I hear is I need to reevaluate using the web version of the client, because the web versions of the client have sucked for so long. I've never even gone back to look at them.
Agreed. And I kind of dreaded doing that webinar because I was like, okay, how am I going to say really good things about Outlook web app and not lie? Well, I guess I'm just going to shut down my desktop, force feed myself OWA, and see what happens. I was like, holy crap, this is good. Oh no.
I was at a SharePoint Saturday New England last year, and one of the Microsoft people, I won't use his name, had an Ask Me Anything. And my question was, so the web app functionality for a lot of the stuff, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, has really come a long way, and that's great. And you can have like 90% of the experience in the web as opposed to the client app. What about Outlook? When is Outlook web app going to get even approaching 50% of it? He then proceeded with an answer that wound around and around and around, ending up with, well, and there'll still be people trying to use Excel. So there you go. I was a linguist in the Navy. I'm professionally trained on how to parse language for content, and it was a 5-minute answer that I could find nothing in. It was a work of beauty, but it pretty much drove home that Outlook web app is just what we're going to have, and that's what we got. And that was as close to the official Microsoft Ask Me Anything answer as I could get.
Yeah.
But it was, I was like,
No attachment. This is my demo environment, so there are no attachments, but there's the files. If this were my work account, you would see just a sea of documents here. But yeah, I really, really, really like, and I like that I can set it. You can probably do this in the desktop app too. Set it to automatically make it a Teams meeting when you add an invitee. So that's nice. And here's that little window into my day. It's fantastic. So if I had other stuff on here, it would show. It's great. Love it.
Hey, Joy, can I ask you a quick question on that last slide that you had for architecture?
For sure. Let me bring it back.
Sure.
Okay.
On that operations piece, it makes perfect sense. Maybe we just have a page for the corporate home site because, there's not a whole lot there. That's the landing page off the global nav. I know there's maybe a dumb question. I know there's 10 different ways to skin a cat, but I guess you could combine team sites and page on corporate home site into just a communication site that has all that content, then their teams and whatever other hub that they're wanting to have. Like those two could be combined on the left into just a comm site for operations. Or is that?
Say that for me one more time. So about combining these two things?
Yeah, into just like a communication site?
Well, this would be the stuff that operations only would have access to.
Okay, I guess where I'm getting confused, I'm picturing them working on those items in Teams, and then when they're finished, that they're getting published out onto their corporate home site page for other people that need to see it.
And that very well could happen.
Okay.
So yeah, in this scenario, and I always like to have these two side by side because this guy comes along for the ride when this guy's created.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
Yep.
I got it now. That's the team site behind the Teams.
Yep, exactly.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
And yeah, as far as the architecture is concerned too, when it comes to that intranet, I like to call it the company public or the department private side. You know, operations may have 3 reports they share once a quarter with the company. And they may not need a whole communication site for that. So we can just give them an information page off the home site and a library to put their stuff in. Good to go. Good to go.
Cool. Thank you.
Absolutely.
If I could put in a request for anything, for a future PAIT Group webinar or one of these user group sessions or something, is a demo, like a little way to get from 0 to this drawing right here.
Oh, from 0 to here?
Right? I've seen these. I've seen a lot of architectures on mind maps and everything like that, but not the making of the sausage. Not the
Okay, so like,
maybe a brand new
would you
world.
say take me from a file share to an intranet?
How do we get from an on-prem, whatever the old sub-site architectures, if there even is one, which is great, to this? What is the thinking? What is the whatever to get to this picture right here? Because I love these pictures. I just don't know how to get it. Well, I mean,
yeah, how do you decide what's what?
Yep. I like that.
We need it bad.
I like that. I even wrote it in my notebook.
I saw that, and thank you very much.
Not OneNote.
Don't even get me started on OneNote. OneNote and I are I don't even know if we're officially on a first name basis. It's like, it's higher than Excel probably for me, but.
Oh, OneNote's I love my OneNote.
Well, that's the problem. If it's my OneNote, but when there was the desktop OneNote, then we had the cloud OneNote, and then there's all this one, and I just don't like it.
Now when it's the OneNote for all OneNotes.
OneNote can be overused. Yeah, I've seen bad things with OneNote, but you can. There's goodness in your OneNote, team OneNote, multiple team notebooks. It can there is goodness there. But
hey, Joy, where do you see Delve mixing into Teams?
Where do I see Delve mixing into Teams? I don't know that I've pondered that before.
And if it's just the Graph API to bring forward contact cards when you mouse over somebody, that's cool.
I mean, yeah, because if the story I heard was correct, Delve was basically created as like a show and tell for the graph. And people said, oh, but I like it. Ooh, I want it. I want it. I want it. I want it. Now, I think the first thing that came to my mind as to where Delve makes itself known is the WhoBot. That was my first thought, because you can go ask the WhoBot, who is Joy Apple in the organization. And it's probably, let's be real, the underlying graph that the WhoBot's talking to. But in my mind, I went there first for Delve. That's all I got.
Well, thanks for delving into that for us.
Oh, it was a joy.
You asked that question just for that pun, didn't you?
I might have. And also to get Jay Leask to smirk at me. But yeah.
Terrible.
Well, on that terrible note, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you, Joy, for the excellent presentation and great content.
Thank you. Thank you very much.